Hello, I'm Ros Atkins. Welcome to BBC World News. Well, in the past few hours, America has suspended millions of dollars of aid to Pakistan's military. We're going to have updates from Islamabad and from Washington, D.C. Rupert Murdoch has flown into London as pressure grows on his expansion plans in the UK. Space Shuttle Atlantis has docked at the International Space Station. We're going to look at the latest pictures from NASA. And is there anywhere which isn't smitten with William and Kate? Not in North America, it seems. It's been parties and polo as the royal couple visit LA. So the US is suspending about a third of its annual aid to the Pakistani military. Just to put this in context, since 9/11, the US has given Pakistan a total of $18 billion, so on average around $2 billion a year. And of course that makes up a significant chunk of Pakistan's annual $6.4 billion defense budget. Let's go straight to Rajesh Merchandani, who's live with us from Washington, D.C. Rajesh, give us a few more details on what's been announced.
Sure. Well, the White House Chief of Staff, William Daley, earlier today said that the US had reason for pause in some of its aid, some of the $2 billion it annually gives Islamabad and the Pakistani military. And he talked about steps that Pakistan had taken that had given them cause for concern. After Osama bin Laden's killing by US special forces at a compound in Pakistan in May, the Pakistanis were furious that they weren't consulted on the raid, but some in America were wondering out loud if people in Pakistan knew that's where bin Laden was hiding, and that's really led to an increasing fractiousness in what is already a very complicated relationship. The Pakistanis expelled US military trainers and denied visas to other personnel. US last week, a senior official suggested that Pakistan was involved in the death of a journalist in that country. So it's getting quite acrimonious. Now the US says it is withholding $800 million of military aid from this uncomfortable ally, Ros.
Rajesh, thank you very much indeed. You're in Washington, D.C. The BBC's Aleem Maqbool is in Islamabad. He gave me the latest reaction from there.
They say they've heard nothing official as yet, but they are trying to say that they've tried to encourage the Americans to divert aid from the military to civilians in any case. And they say they've carried out operations against militants without American assistance too. So they're clearly trying to save face, but this will undoubtedly hurt the Pakistani army. It's become increasingly reliant on American aid. For example, all of those operations it carries out in the tribal areas and in the northwest of Pakistan, it pretty much hands over a bill to Washington at the end of each month to ask for some of that to be paid back. There is equipment that was promised which now won't be coming, so it will hurt Pakistan. But the question is, how far can you push Pakistan without it being counterproductive? That's the question that will be being asked, certainly in Washington. It's a very difficult tightrope to walk, because will this suspension of aid push Pakistan to do more of what America wants, or will it be, as I say, counterproductive? Will they feel less inclined to help America?
There's Aleem in Islamabad. Let's turn our attention to the Horn of Africa, where there is a severe drought, the worst, some are saying, in 60 years. It's displaced thousands of people, and deaths are now being reported at one of the newest refugee camps, which is in Ethiopia. Now, it's been set up to house Somalis, and aid agencies say that already tents, water, latrines and medical care are urgently needed. And Dolo Ado is in southeastern Ethiopia, just close to the border with Somalia. Our World Affairs correspondent Mike Waldridge is there. He sends this report.
Somali refugees fleeing into Ethiopia all pass through here, a transit camp close to the border. Cooked in great vats, there's a meal here of meat, rice and potatoes for everyone for up to 6 days. But the number of refugees has risen so rapidly that often now they're here much longer. And those who are say they're going hungry. It's a bottleneck, bad news for those who were weak and vulnerable on reaching Ethiopia. Convoys of minibuses set off twice a day, heading for the newest of the refugee camps. This one took roughly 1,000 refugees to Kobe, already nearing its intended capacity of 20,000. But that, it now emerges, is far from being Kobe's only problem. These are the graves of children in a camp that's so short of tents that many of the refugees are living among the thorn bushes. The mother of these 4 children had just died. The family came to Ethiopia nearly 3 weeks ago. Adan Mahade Noor and his family lost virtually all their livestock from drought in Somalia and came here because they were told they would get relief aid. With many people here and too much wind blowing, he says, it causes colds to get worse and stomach upsets and can mean a quick death. We estimate that around 10 children die every day, he says. Alarmed aid officials agree. So does this mean there is a disaster in the making?
It's certainly in the making. I think the death rates and the mortality rates are extremely high and they worry everyone. If we don't respond quickly to this with the international community, the government and everyone, I think we'll have serious, serious long-term problems. So yes, it's very serious and we're trying to respond as quickly as we can.
But for now, with each day that passes with many more refugees arriving, the challenge of staving off disaster here is becoming all the greater. Mike Wooldridge, BBC News, southeastern Ethiopia.
So Mike sent that report from Ethiopia. I've been speaking to the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, who's been visiting the biggest refugee camp in the whole of the Horn of Africa. It's in Kenya, and we'll play you that interview in just a few minutes' time here on BBC World News. In the meantime, though, let's turn our attention to that phone hacking scandal in the UK. Rupert Murdoch's come to town to deal with the situation at News International. And, of course, what else could he be reading as he went from the airport into the offices in Wapping on the outskirts of London, the News of the World, the last edition of the News of the World after 168 years in print. And lots of pressure building up today on the government to decide whether Mr. Murdoch should be allowed to expand his already substantial media holdings in the UK. He has 4 newspapers, 3 now that the News of the World has gone. He wants to own the whole of satellite broadcaster Sky B. I've been speaking to Damien Green, a cabinet minister, government minister, about this, talking to him about whether it is time to pause on those plans to take over Sky B.
Well, David Cameron asked for and received assurances at the time. What everyone knew at the time was that there had been a police investigation, people had been convicted and indeed jailed for that. Andy Coulson had resigned as editor of the News of the World, saying, although he didn't know anything about it, that he was prepared to take responsibility. So David Cameron gave him a second chance, and that was a perfectly reasonable decision to take at the time.
There's Damien Green. Now, here is a grab of the most watched videos on the BBC News website, and every time I look at it, all I'm seeing is more and more videos of the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. They were in Canada for 9 days. They're now in LA, and they started things off, as you can see, with William taking part in a polo game. Not only was he on the winning side, but he also scored 4 goals, which in my book is a little bit close to showing off. And then once they dusted themselves down after that, they then went to a BAFTA do in the evening. I don't know if we can pull up pictures of that as well. BAFTA represents the British film industry, and Kate and William are there to promote British talent. Here you can see the two of them getting out of their people carrier, stepping up inside. William even cracked a couple of jokes which seemed to go down well. And if you're wondering where they are, they're at the 1920s Art Deco Belasco Theatre in central LA. Very nice if you are allowed to visit that one. So you can go and see lots of those if you want. And if you're wondering why are they so popular, well, the British actor and comedian Stephen Fry has been trying to explain it.
There's a special luster that you just can't recreate. I was saying to someone that if they managed to, you know, through genetics managed to reproduce Marilyn Monroe and Clark Gable, and they came in the room at one end and the Cambridges came in at the other, all of Hollywood would be staring at the Cambridges. You know, they have a very particular charisma at the moment, and that's something that it's wonderful to take advantage of if you're British.
Now, in other news, the Syrian Foreign Ministry has summoned the American and French ambassadors to protest at their visit 2 days ago to the city of Hama. The two ambassadors said their visit was meant to express solidarity with protesters there. The Syrian officials say they breached diplomatic protocol. A pleasure boat carrying more than 170 people has sunk in the Volga River in Russia. The Russian authorities say 84 people have been rescued, 1 has died, and the search continues for survivors. Chinese media say 2 workers trapped in a collapsed coal mine for more than a week have been pulled out alive. The 2 were among 18 miners buried in sludge and rubble after heavy rain. Police in India say at least 20 people were killed when a train derailed in the state of Uttar Pradesh. More than 100 more were injured and others remain trapped. Now, President Bashir of Sudan has told the BBC that his country wants a peaceful resolution to the disputed border region of Abyei, but he did not rule out the use of force if the newly independent state of South Sudan were to take up arms to keep the region. In his first interview since the breakup of Sudan, he's been speaking exclusively to the BBC's Zainab Badawi.
When we achieved peace, it was based on a conviction, and the last battle between us and the Sudan People's Liberation Army was in Torit, in which we decimated southern SPLA troops. We were fighting for peace, and we divided Sudan for peace, and we are keen on preserving peace. We should never fight unless we are compelled to do so.
But if Abyei were to stay with the South, I mean, it's a very simple question. Do you foresee any possibility that North and South Sudan could take up arms against each other over this issue of Abyei?
أبيي عندها بروتوكول إذا تم حلها بالحل السلمي.
There is a protocol on Abyei, a protocol that governs Abyei if there is a peaceful solution. But in the past, we were forced to fight when they tried to impose a new reality.
اللي خلانا نحن المرة فاتت ندفع قواتنا إلى أبيي.
And you can watch the full interview with President Omar al-Bashir on Hard Talk on Monday at these times on BBC World News. Now, governments are always trying to find ways to reduce emissions without damaging their economies. That's the crucial bit. And Australia believes it's found a policy which could work. Here's Phil Mercer in Sydney.
The carbon tax is Australia's biggest economic reform in a generation. The Prime Minister says it will cut the country's emissions by 160 million tonnes within a decade, or the equivalent of taking 45 million cars off the road. 500 of Australia's worst polluters are to be forced to pay for each tonne of carbon dioxide they emit. The government believes those companies must innovate and change as they strive to reduce their emissions and lower their tax bills.
We generate more carbon pollution per head than any other people in the developed world. Now, if you want to use an analogy about a running race, we're about to run a